The Witch Hunt. I'm Tommy, and my show starts now. Welcome to the show. I'm Tomi Lahren. Good to be back with you. And yeah, we have a lot to cover. I'm going to get to the whole General Flynn witch hunt later, but first, I'm taking it back to Sunday night and the Grammys. So let's talk about Joy Villa. You may have never heard of her before Sunday night, but she has more guts than all of the Hollywood snowflakes combined. And why? Because she did this. And yeah, when I saw this, I was pretty freaking ecstatic. And yeah, I tweeted about it. But some people, and when I say people, I mean Twitter trolls, thought it was hypocritical of me to applaud Joy, but perhaps they don't understand the key difference between someone like Beyonce saluting the Black Panthers at the Super Bowl, or Sarah Silverman calling for a military coup against President Trump, or a tribe called Quest labeling our president Agent Orange, and Joy Villa wearing a dress in honor of our 45th president. Big freaking difference. Joy Villa's dress wasn't mean or nasty or vile or saluting a hate group or spitting in the face of law enforcement or asking for a military takeover of the United States. No, it was a dress, a beautiful dress saluting the President of the United States. I know it's hard for the snowflakes to conceptualize and accept reality, but yes, like it or not, Donald Trump is our president. He's your president, too. Hollywood fell to their knees over President Obama for over 8 years, and that's whatever. But he's gone, and the office is filled. End of story. After all the nasty boycotts, protests, riots, and pay disturbances, it was nice to see an African-American entertainer like Joy Villa respecting not only President Trump, but the office of the president. So there's the difference. I hope that helps. Joining me now with his reaction to this and more, I welcome political journalist and author of Private Anti-Piracy Navies, John Clark Levin. John Clark, thanks for being with me.
Thanks for having me back on the show, Tommy.
Well, of course. I know we've got a lot to talk about, but I want to go back to the Grammys. I've been gone for a couple of days, so I think it's important to start there in what I just discussed. Now, let's talk about Joy Villa. What did you think of her statement, or if it was even a statement?
You know, the truth is, Tommy, I don't follow the back and forth of Grammy politics very closely. As far as I'm concerned, any year that John Williams doesn't sweep it is kind of bad news for me.
Well, to me, this is a larger picture, because where we used to be able to separate pop culture from politics or sports from politics or really anything from politics, those days are over, because we've got all these Hollywood elite now suddenly making a voice in politics. And you know what? It's their free speech. It's their First Amendment right to do so. However, they came after Joy Villa pretty dang hard for wearing a dress. Do you think that's fair?
Well, I don't like to see the whole witch hunt mentality about this. I am not as much of a fan of the president as you are, but at the same time, I certainly respect the expression that anyone wants to make on the red carpet.
Do you think it's appropriate for the Hollywood elite to be making political statements? I mean, even if it's appropriate, is it appreciated? Do you think it's a smart move, especially for most of these that consider themselves Democrats and would like to see a Democrat elected in 2020? Do you think it's a strong strategy here?
Well, I think it's the marketplace of ideas, Tommy. Everyone wears whatever they feel will send the message they want to. I mean, Lady Gaga had her famous meat dress. That sent a strong message. I'm not quite sure what it was. But when we see these kinds of statements, I think it's best to just let that play out. And if people find success with that, more power to them.
All right, well, let's move on to something. I know there's something in particular you wanted to discuss with me today, and that's something that I say regularly, which is if you hate this country so much, you want to resist everything about this country, well, there's the freaking door. So let's take a look at some of my final thoughts where I express just that.
Sure.
I know the whole concept of placing American national security first is a shock to the system. After all, we just endured an 8-year-long American apology tour courtesy of Barack Obama and friends. That apology tour not only castrated and embarrassed us globally, it sent a clear message to our allies and our enemies. The USA under Barack Obama places feelings and Muslim sensitivity over its own damn citizens. But breaking news, that song and dance is over. All right, so I'm sure you've seen that. I know that you've referred to it in the past. So let's talk about it. What's your beef with it?
Well, I think you've actually struck on a very important point here, Tommy, and that is that the President of the United States, by the things he says and fails to say, sends very important messages to both our allies and our enemies. And the trouble is with America First, I see in my background studying security and international relations, this slogan is sending a harmful message.
Okay, you're really going to have to elaborate on that, because it is my feeling, and the feeling of, I think, all of us that want a sovereign nation, that you should be able to put your own nation first within your own nation, and every nation has that right. Where am I missing the mark here?
See, I don't disagree with that at all, Tommy. In fact, the issue here is really about short-term interests versus long-term interests. And I appreciate that you value getting the facts right and getting the history right. And the trouble is, America First is a slogan synonymous with weakness, retreat, appeasement, and lack of leadership. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to just go through a little bit of that history to get at why we need a better approach.
But I want to ask you something, because when I say America First, I'm not talking about isolationism. I'm not talking about retreating from everything. I'm not talking about sitting in the corner and sitting in the United States in our little bubble. That's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about America First. I'm talking about advancing America's interests first and foremost over the interests of everyone else in the entire world, because we have that right. And especially speaking on that issue when we're talking about travel bans, when we're talking about border security, national security, that's what I'm talking about when I say America First. So I'm not really talking about isolationism. I don't know if you quite got my gist there.
I understand what's in your heart on this, Tommy, and maybe even the president's heart is in the right place. The trouble is, when our allies hear America First, they hear, if America thinks we can get a better deal for ourselves, we will hang you out to dry. No one respects or follows a leader who expresses that principle. Second, America First emboldens dictators, tyrants, and terrorists all over the world, because they hear, as long as you don't kill Americans, you have a green light to commit genocide and acts of aggression. So even though President Trump might not mean that, that's how that message is being received in capitals all over the world.
And, I can understand what you're saying by that, especially when we're speaking about our allies. But I feel that, many of our allies, Israel included, had a giant slap in the face from 8 years of a President Obama administration. So I see that it was a clear signal to our allies. I think President Obama, with his fake red line in Syria, I think that was another clear indication of weakness on behalf of the United States. I think Trump sends a different message. But I agree with you. What the president says and does certainly does matter. I think there's a lot of hysteria now surrounding who he chooses to be friendly with and who he chooses not to be. But I do think that there are some key pieces of legislation, or should I say false legislation or false deal making, which really are concessions lists, like this deal with Iran, which need to be taken a second look at. And when we say America First, we mean we're not going to placate to you. We're not going to bow to you, because we're the freaking United States of America.
Well, yes, I was a strong critic of the president on the red line in Syria, so I'm certainly not defending how that was handled. But this being the day after Valentine's Day, it's useful to think about our alliances like romantic relationships in college. When you're dating someone at age 20, 22, you still think of your own interests. You're not going to give up everything for that person. But a healthy relationship entails trade-offs, sacrifices, and genuinely thinking of the other person's interests too. So if someone asks you out, Tommy, and their constant motto is me first, me first, me first, are you going to want to date them?
Okay, I think that there might be kind of an apples to oranges comparison here, but I see what you're saying. You know what? In the spirit of being the day after Valentine's Day, I'm going to go ahead and say you're right. There are certainly significant allies that we need to be friendly with, stay close with, remain close with. I think that was also seen today with the press conference with Bibi Netanyahu. I think good things to come, but I appreciate your voice, and thanks for being with me tonight.
Thanks so much, Tommy. Thanks for having me on.
So next, I sit down with Glenn Beck's chief researcher, Jason Buttrill, to discuss this whole General Flynn mess. Oh, yes. Don't miss it. We'll be right back.